Hi folks, Joe here. Welcome to installment number 5 of 3 critical questions you must ask. In the last video we talked a lot about how disconnects happen across a project team, right? And how dangerous it is when everyone is not on the same page in terms of what exactly is being built. People have different understandings about what a product is actually going to be. What's going to show up on the screen? How do the workflows operate? What information are we collecting? What are we asking people within the organization to do with the information once we get it? Okay, any number of things. A big part of avoiding the kinds of disconnects that I talked about is also ensuring that you have the right people involved in the conversations to begin with. All right, that means you have all the right people in the room. It means that you have every person who is quote unquote a stakeholder in the room. And I want to dig into that term a little bit and what it means. Because typically what happens in a project situation, and I'm sure a lot of you can relate to this, is that the default scenario is sort of that the person who asked you to come in or be part of the project, or whoever you talk to, right, during the prospecting process, if you're an outside business and you were trying to win the business, that's who's usually in the room, okay? Or if you're working inside an organization, who's typically in the room when you start a project? Well, that's usually the design and or development team, right? IT to some degree. It may be a project manager, it may be a product owner, maybe someone from the business side, but by and large what typically happens is the people who you started the conversation with are the people in the room. And the issue with that is this. In every organization, and again, I don't care how large or how small, time has proven this to me, there are always other stakeholders. There are always other people who have a stake in the outcome of what happens, okay? And they are not always at the table. One of the first things that I do when I work with an organization, and because I work with large organizations, this is extremely important. I sort of insist that at least at the very beginning of the engagement, I want representatives from every related department to this product to be present at the meeting. That means operations, it means marketing, it means sales, it means support, it means IT, it means QA, it means, you know, anyone and everyone who has a stake in the outcome, right? And a lot of times I get the question, well, we don't normally include those people in these meetings, and I don't know if we can really get everybody's schedules together to make that happen. And what I explain is some version of the following. You have to. You have to get those people in the room. They need to be there, and here's why. They undoubtedly have a stake in whether this succeeds or fails, almost always. Unless an organization is so divided that, you know, this end of the house has nothing to do with the success or failure of the other half, and that does happen. But unless that's the case, you need those other people present at the table, because here's what will happen. If you don't invite them, or if you do invite them and they decline to show up and say, well, you know, you don't need me there, you don't need me there, you don't need me there, what always happens, what inevitably happens, is they do what Guy Kawasaki calls a swoop and poop. Okay, which is exactly what it sounds like. At some point down the line, when you are in the process of design or development, or maybe you're even into QA testing, when they finally get a look at what's been created, they sort of come in, look at it and say, that's wrong, that shouldn't be like that, this should be like this, and we have to include this, 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 and this, and where's this feature, and why isn't this here, and then they leave the room. Right? Swoop, poop, here it is, do this, I'm gone. There is nothing good about this situation. Nothing. It absolutely stalls progress. It puts everyone into a tailspin. It causes a tremendous amount of stress, not only for the project team, but for the person that inadvertently is doing this action in the first place as well, because they're stressed out as well, right? They have risk. They have a commitment. They have an investment to some degree that they made in the project. Because they're a stakeholder, because their department has a play in what's happening, they're responsible to some degree for success or failure. Their necks are being held to the chopping block to some degree if this thing blows up. You have to always remember that. As such, you absolutely have to ask, who needs to be at the table? And this is a question that I am asked probably on a monthly basis, okay, by students, by folks who are new to the disciplines of UX, and even in some cases, folks who have worked in organizations for a long time, and they're frustrated about the fact that they always seem to get surprises during the development process, during the ideation of here's what we're building, here's what we're designing, here's how it's going to work. So, right, so the question I get is, well, who should be in the room? Here's how you figure that out. Okay, forget about roles for a second. Forget about titles, CEO, COO, director of A, B, C, and D. Forget about that for a second. Here are the questions that you need to ask whoever your initial contact is up front. Again, whether you work for yourself and you're working with a client, or whether you work in-house and you're starting down a project path. You want to ask these questions every time, even if you think it should be obvious, even if other people think you should already know. That's fine, I don't care. Don't be embarrassed. Don't even think twice about it. Ask these questions. Things shift in organizations all the time. People's responsibilities often change. Ask the question. Here's what you ask. Number one, who's financing this? Right? Who's footing the bill for design, for development, for marketing? Who's on the line for saying, yes, we as an organization are going to spend that money? That person needs to be involved, at least at the outset. Next, who's creating all this? From content to design, form, right? Function, technology, the platform, front-end development, middle-tier logic, back-end database work, QA testing, right? All these things. Who is actually doing the building here? Who's doing the creating? Who manages it? Right? Who manages the product's use? Who monitors what happens? Right? Who's on the hook for how the product does, how people pick it up, what problems they do or don't have? On the heels of that, who uses and acts on any data that gets collected? Okay, within an organization, for example, if we're asking customers to fill out a series of forms, if that's, a lot of enterprise apps are nothing but series of forms. If people are giving us stuff, who's on the receiving end of it? Okay, where's that data go? Who has to deal with it? Who has to act on it, or give it to somebody else, or translate it, or analyze it, or get reporting on it, whatever the case may be. Okay. Who supports end customers? Who supports third-party organizations that may be reselling our products? Who's on the hook for a phone call or an email or a chat that says, I'm having trouble, this is driving me crazy, help me? Those people have a stake in the outcome, okay? Who sells and promotes it? Sales organizations within large companies or even independent salespeople, okay? You may only have one person who's responsible for customer sales in small organizations. Those people are never invited to these meetings, and that blows my mind because they are on the front lines of speaking with customers. They are on the front lines of understanding what people love and what really pisses them off, okay? They have insight that is almost never tapped. Salespeople are a gold mine of information, and they should at least be involved in the initial discussions. Who's going to deliver it, right? Who's going to deliver this product to consumers? And that means, as an organization, okay, if we have, again, I'll use the example of third-party organizations who are reselling our product, or if, okay, we have a partnership with, I'm just making this up, Amazon, right, to deliver services to customers. They have a stake in the outcome as well. So they need to be part of the initial discussions to some degree, because you have to figure out what they need, right? In some cases, it's nothing more than, okay, well, we need an API to do this, 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 and this. But again, if you don't involve those people, you're leaving a host of things that you do not know up in the air somewhere, okay? Finally, the overall, overarching, probably most important question you can ask if you don't have good fits in all those roles is this. who influences this product? Who influences what it is? Who influences what it does? And who can help or hinder its ability to be a success? Who has veto power, right? Who in this organization, if they get wind that this is going on and they don't agree with something, who has the power or the ability to just say, time out, stop, we're not doing this anymore? You would be shocked, maybe not, at how often influencers, people who have real influence over whether a project actually continues, whether it gets funded, whether it goes on and actually ever gets released. There are hundreds and hundreds and probably thousands of products that go through a development process and simply never launch because of that. And a lot of times that is a swoop and poop situation, like I said before. Somebody gets wind of something going on and they go, wait a minute, time out. I didn't agree to this. Why are we doing this? No one contacted me. This is a bad place to be for any number of reasons, okay, aside from the obvious ones. So these are the kinds of questions you want to ask when you're trying to figure out who needs to be at the table. And as I said before, I am religious about insisting that at least in the first day, the kickoff session, and I say kickoff session because I don't like meetings. Every meeting to me should be a working session to some degree. We should be getting something done. To that end, at least the very first day, we spend at least 3 hours, okay, if not more, and I sort of insist on that. I want everyone who has risk in the room, okay, because anyone who has a risk as to whether the project succeeds or fails, anyone who has risk has influence, right? Remember this. Risk equals influence. Always has, always will, tremendously important. Who has the most to gain or to lose here? And if anyone has either one of those qualities, they need to be involved in the discussions. Okay, so that's one of the ways you prevent the kinds of surprises and disconnects and misunderstandings that we talked about in the last video. So I'm going to leave you with that thought. I would encourage you to take a look at whatever your current situation is, whatever current project is you're working on. Maybe you're going down a path with a prospect who's not yet a client, and you're talking to them about how the project is going to run, or you're trying to scope it, right? I want you to think about these things. Make sure that you touch this idea of making sure that you get stakeholders in the room very early on in the project. Make sure that there's a component of your scope of work that deals with understanding everybody's position and everybody's need and everybody's risk. All right? Apply it to what you're doing. Feel free to shoot me an email or leave comments here and tell me, how it's working. Tell me what's going well. Tell me where you're struggling. Ask me questions. That's what I'm here for. Okay? Until next time, I invite you once again to visit givegoodux.com for articles, advice, free downloads, and all sorts of good stuff to help you in your UX pursuits. And as always, I also encourage you, if you have not done so yet, to check out my new book, Think First, which is essentially a roadmap to UX product strategy. It digs into all of the stuff that we're talking about here to a much greater degree. Until next time, I wish you much success, and remember to give good UX.